So here now is an incantation from Dendera, the Temple of Hathor. We sound our drum for her spirit. We dance her grace. We see her lovely form in the heavens. She is Our Lady of Sistrum, Hathor, Hathor.
Come along with us as we dive into the fascinating world of sound, exploring its many dimensions, blending the best of both worlds to uncover the secrets of sound, voice, and vibration. Welcome, everyone. Today I have a wonderful guest, and I wanted to read this first before I introduce her. Tahya merges the ancient goddess with the modern day woman to awaken what has been lost but needs to be understood once again. And that was a comment that somebody made on her website. Tahya, it is my honor to have you on today's conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. She and I have kind of been in similar circles, watching each other from afar, as it were. I think I was at one of her very first presentations. I don't know how long ago that was, but it was so impacting to me that I actually bought one of her beautiful instruments, the Ceremonial Systrum that she sells. She designed and sells. And it is just gorgeous. And we're going to talk about that and many other topics, Egypt being one of them, her connection to Egypt and the goddess Hathor, and many other things. So you'll want to stick around for that. So please give us some, I'd love to hear first. I love how you pronounce your name and the meaning of your name, please.
Well, thank you, Ruth. It is a delight, and I'm honored to be here and spending this time with you this afternoon. And yes, I am an American woman of Central European and Irish descent, and upon hearing Egyptian rhythms and accompanying intoxicating melodies, I found myself swept away on a magic carpet ride. And I was in my late teens, and as I pursued the movement to this music, I found myself transformed. It just awakened something deep within me that was empowering and gave me a lot of self-confidence. And up until that point, I had been a very shy young woman and had very little self-esteem. So all of this was awakened upon hearing this music and pursuing the dance. And in the midst of that, the other piece that was really fun is that it was an invitation as a young adult to play dress up, which was one of my favorite things as a kid. So to explore costuming was also a big treat. And ultimately, when I stepped into the performance arena, I thought that my Christian birth name no longer suited me. And I was at a party in Boulder, Colorado, and there was an Egyptian oud player. And I asked him if he could suggest a name for me. And he suggested the name Tahya. It was the first word that came out of his mouth after I asked the question. And it right away resonated with me. And I asked him what it meant. And he said that it meant greetings or welcome. And I thought, well, that is perfect, because I liked the sound of it. My birth name, or the name that my parents called me, started with a T, ended with an A. So I was like, okay, well, that's cool also. Perfect. And so, I adopted that name for myself. Short story long.
No, it's okay. No, it's beautiful, beautiful story. Yeah, I've come across one of my other guests also changed her name because she felt that her name did not resonate, and she channeled a new name for herself. And it's interesting because, you know, you come into this world and our names are beautiful. You know, our parents give us these gorgeous names, but sometimes, well, most of the times we're evolving, right? We evolve
Right.
into these other personas that we wish to take on that fit us more appropriately. And a name is something that once you change that, you know, it's like you're living into that name, kind of, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And I love well, I was reading a little bit about your bio and what you've done with dance, certainly with the dance arts, as a long history as a dancer, also bringing in percussion and the sistrum and the ancient feminine arts as well into that. I'd love to delve into that a little bit more because we feel like, you know, the divine feminine is definitely on the rise. And I say that as the divine feminine aspect for the men as well, because it really embraces. There really is. I mean, there's aspects, but we're really not. I think in our true form, I don't think we're neither. We are neither male nor female. I think we are both. So,
Right. The old yin and yang.
right. So I do embrace both with that
As
comment.
do
But
I. As do
yeah,
I.
but I'd love to hear a little more about that, your background as a dancer, how it evolved into, you know, empowering the divine feminine through your dance arts.
I think that it started right away. And so I think also describing this as an evolutionary journey is 500% accurate. And as I said, I first heard the music and got swept away and intrigued just to find the movement to the music. It struck such a deep chord within me, and it kind of like you think of what and I know you can relate to this. I think about the way a gong, you know, resonates and the sound reverberates and ushers and, you know, ripples outward. And that's how I felt when I heard the music and these rhythms. It struck something really deep inside of me, and it rippled throughout my whole being. And I went in search of, how do you move to this? At the time that I was growing up in the community I was growing up in, the only thing that was available was ballet, and I was absolutely not built to a ballerina size. I just went through my youth and my early teens lamenting that there was nowhere for me to express myself as a dancer. I did take guitar lessons, and so I did some expression of my creative spirit through singing and playing guitar. And so my path was to get a job so that I had enough clerical skills that I could get a job in a recording studio, and then, you know, be at the ready when some singer couldn't show up, and I would show up, you know. Anyway, I heard this music and I went in pursuit of the dance. And one of the very first things I learned about these movements, my teacher explained to us that they were deeply steeped in women's traditions dating back thousands and thousands of years to a time when we were goddess worshiping people. Now you have to understand, this is a long time ago. This is over 50 years ago that somebody was talking to me for the first time in my life about goddess worshiping cultures. And it was, you know, another like eye-opening, earth-shattering moment for me, because I had never heard the word goddess before. Wow. I grew up in a patriarchal Catholic household, and everything was about God the Father. And I remember lamenting as a kid. I was jealous of the altar boys being able to ring the bells during the transformation of the host, right, at communion, and all the mystery. I mean, again, experience in life is very broad. I've been around for a long time. Going back to when I was in my youth, they were still doing Catholic masses in Latin. So there was a lot of mystery, and there was a lot of magic, and there was incense and bells ringing. And I felt very much an outsider and an observer. I felt, the only thing I noticed was that either you could become a nun and teach in a school, or you could be the church lady dusting the pews, but you couldn't get anywhere near the inner sanctuary. And I felt really gypped. So, with all of that background of being indoctrinated into a religious experience that was completely patriarchal, women were basically supposed to be invisible. When I showed up at this dance class, and the first thing she said was that it goes back to these ancient goddess worshiping cultures, again, it was earth-shattering for me to even hear the word goddess, much less the fact that there were rituals in which women participated honoring the goddess. Mm. And that's when I just said to myself, this is it. I want the lifetime membership. And here I am, my life isn't over. Thank you, God. Thank you, Goddess. But it's been a long lifetime experience of exploring all of this. And because it dates back so far, there is so much to explore. So I encourage anyone interested to take the dive, because you will never be bored. There's so much interesting information, especially available now because we have access to things on the internet. And I'm just going to say it right from the get-go. The other thing I want to make sure that I include telling people about is the book by Lane Redmond, When the Drummers Were Women. When the Drummers Were Women, Lane Redmond. Her book came out in, I think, 1996 or 1997. And by that time, I had already been involved in the dance for about 20 years. So I had been, even the internet was still in its infancy then. So everything that I was learning was being handed down to me in the traditional fashion of being transmitted orally from one generation to the next. And so I felt really honored and privileged that I was a part of this lineage of it being handed down, almost like a secret society. I mean, it wasn't intended to be secret per se, but because of the overwhelming power, shall we say it, of the patriarchy, things about women and women's culture absolutely had been swept under the carpet, and they were not discussed, and they were nearly forgotten. Even to the point, before I even met Lane Redmond or Glenn Velez, I had been at the Metropolitan Museum, and I was wandering around, and I saw a statue of what looked like a queen. So it was a woman with a crown on her head, and she was... She had a drum, or she had an object, let's put it that way. She had an object that she had like this, standing vertically on her lap. And I will never forget that the description said, "Woman with plate." And in my late teens, not even having delved all that deeply into the dance yet, I still had a knowing. There's no way that's a plate.
Sorry, folks, that's a drum.
Well, I didn't even know it was a drum then, but I just knew it wasn't a plate.
Not a plate. It's typical because they're associating women with food preparation, right?
The information that I was privy to over the course of my study of the dance was being provided to me in an oral tradition. And there were some people at that time who were taking imagery from drawings and postcards. Jamila Salampur was my teacher's teacher, and I went on to also study with Jamila. And Jamila published a book called From Cave to Cult to Cabaret. And so she started to put together a history of the dance based on her dipping her toes into the history of the dance and looking at, as again, like cave painting drawings and postcards from World's Fairs and so forth. So we were starting to have a little bit of a written history. But for the most part, what I learned was in an oral tradition. And when I started the dance, I was expected to play finger cymbals. And my teacher was very insistent that we become well-versed on articulating the rhythms that we were dancing to, and then that would also facilitate us being better finger cymbal players. So she spent about 20 minutes of every class teaching us how to play the rhythms on the doumbek. Well, it's back there, but so the little hourglass shaped drum back there.
Yes, yes.
Learning to speak the rhythms was very helpful. At any rate, 20 years into all of that, I had the opportunity to meet Lane Redmond before the book came out, and I took a frame drum class with her, and that was another big turning point, meeting her and listening to her talk about the elements of the sounds on the drum and so forth, and she was super excited because she was about to have her book published and on bookshelves. And as soon as it came out, I got myself a copy, and I'm actually into 3 copies of it now because I've referenced it so much. There is so much great material in this book that every book I have seems to fall apart at the seams because I keep opening it and referencing it so many times. Anyway, my point is that it was incredible to finally have this book that talked about all these different goddesses in different parts of the world to whom we offered ritual and offered our prayers and invoked blessings. And so, again, it's like I can't ever talk to anybody without mentioning her book because it is an incredible wealth of information.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Wow. I love, you're talking about, the goddesses and honoring them also with sound, right?
Right.
With sound. Now this is all fascinating because it's so interesting to me how you didn't go out of the country to get this information, right?
No.
This was all handed down somewhere, however, in this country, there are people with this knowledge. So that's really fascinating to me. I love how it's all knowledge is shared, right? Around the world. So what goddesses have come up in your experiences?
Again, going back to my association with Lane and reading this book, one of the goddesses that really, again, resonated with me was the Egyptian goddess Hathor. I certainly had heard about Isis, the Egyptian goddess, the winged goddess, the mother goddess, but I had not ever heard of the goddess Hathor, who is also considered a mother goddess. Yes. And she is the consort of the son of Isis, who is Horus. And Horus was very prevalent because he was the deity associated with the pharaohs. So here's Hathor, recognized actually as the house of Horus. Her name means house of Horus. So Hat is house, and Hor is the abbreviation for Horus. So it's Hathor, Hathor. And I read about the temple dedicated to Hathor at Dendera in Lane's book. And in the book, she talks about Hathor and her priestesses playing the frame drum. I mean, every goddess that she mentions in this book all had priestesses who played percussion. But for whatever reason, Hathor, really leapt off the page for me. And in the text where she talks about Hathor and the temple at Dendera, she shows pictures of the goddess herself playing the drum. And then she went on to describe one of the smaller chapels at the temple complex known as the Memesi, or birth house. And in that birth house, she described a processional of 61 priestesses playing frame drum and sistrum. And she described along one wall, there's a procession of 32 priestesses playing frame drum, and on the opposite wall, 29 priestesses playing sistrum. But she didn't have a picture of it. So I didn't really know what she was talking about. And so it just kind of got lodged in the back of my head and piqued my curiosity. So that was, I would say, my introduction, if you will, to Hathor. And before I go any further, I just want to read for you one of the opening statements in the introduction of Lane's book, where she says, and the reason I love this is because it kind of ties together, again, the dancing and the drumming and the relationship of those arts to the goddess. In oldest times, women's bodies were considered holy because they had the seemingly magical ability to give birth, to create new human beings. As a result, women became the first technicians of the sacred, performing religious functions as we would today associate with the clergy or priesthood. Sacred drumming was one of their primary skills. It remained a powerful tool for communal bonding and the individual transformation until the fall of the Roman Empire. And again, I mean, right from the get-go, in the introduction of the book, introduction, right on the first page, she's talking about the reverence of women and their bodies being able to bring new life onto the planet. And that was one of the very first things that I was taught in the oral tradition of the dance, was that women in the ancient cultures were revered for their magical life-giving properties. They didn't understand how it worked, and so it was magical to them that we could grow new life within us. And so there were blessings invoked from the deities and the heavens above to have safe deliveries and to have expanding families. Of course, that would also help with being able to work in the fields and so forth if you had a healthy family. And that was the other piece that was so inviting to me, because being a young woman who was built to a curvaceous body, I loved that in ancient cultures they appreciated full-figured women because of their life-giving abilities, because slender women were considered not as well suited for childbearing. And so women who were more full-figured were more the ideal. And I was like, okay, thank you.
I mean, the hips, the width of the hips, probably,
Right.
yeah, for the
Right.
baby, for the birth canal. Wonderful story, and I can see your passion when you speak of it. The Temple of Dendera. I think I saw a documentary on that, and it was just absolutely on Gaia, I think Gaia TV, absolutely riveting. I was riveted. And one of the things I remember on the very top of the temple, isn't there something with all of the zodiac signs are all inscribed? And it's
Right,
just
in
like
the
that has
ceiling,
some, it's just beautiful. But there is one of the inscriptions read, and I'm paraphrasing here, "The sky and the stars make music in you." Something like that. Isn't it? right? And it
Yeah,
just
that's it.
speaks,
Yes.
yeah, it just speaks to the nature of, how they knew that sound had power, that
Right.
frequency sound had this incredible power, and that we were that. Oh, I have to get a frame drum. I have to, I absolutely have to. But I find that there's something so earthy and viscerally powerful about the drumming, and using the drumming with your voice,
Yep.
and this system. I want to talk to you a little later about that, like how the significance of it. But just the drumming piece of it, how these women were honoring the divine feminine, honoring their lives, honoring whoever with the sound. The
Right.
sound was a huge part of their lives, I think, especially used in in a ceremonial sense, particularly.
Well, before I go any further, because you made mention of it, following the introduction, part one, the chapter is entitled The Divine Feminine, and the image that she provides is the image of Hathor playing the frame drum for Horus, represented as the falcon. And she quotes the inscription on the wall at the temple of Hathor that you were just referring to. The sky and its stars make music to you. The sun and the moon praise you. The gods exalt you, and the goddesses sing to you.
I was just getting chills. Sure, reading that. Oh, so beautiful.
With regards to the drum, and I had a certain advantage, if you will, over some of the other people because I already had been articulating the sounds of the drum because they also are the same sounds that they use playing the doumbek, because that tradition also had been handed down in an oral fashion. As I understand it, there just weren't any written records of rhythms. It was all just handed down in an oral tradition. And so you would learn the Belody rhythm, for example. The 4/4 Egyptian rhythm pattern is doom, doom, teka, tek, doom, teka, tek, teka, doom, doom, teka, tek, doom, teka, tek. So I already knew that vocabulary, if you will, and I knew what it sounded like on a drum. So once I learned the technique of how to hold this drum and how to play it, I already had the rhythm in my body. I already knew how to articulate it.
Right.
And as my dear friend Paolo Mattioli, who was the djembe drum designer for Remo Manufacturing, my dear brother from another mother who is now passed on, he learned from his West African drumming experiences that in that culture, you learn if you can say it, you can play it. Then again, like once I had that drum in my hand, it was like, ooh, I get it. I'm home. I love how the sound of the drum,
Yeah, I was just going to say.
because you're holding it. I mean, I'm holding it up by my head right now, but typically my arms are relaxed and I have it down so that the sound of the drum is coming out and
Into your
like
body.
it resonates into your heart chakra. It's so lovely. And again, going back to my overall experience, at some point in time around, I don't know, I'd have to look at my astrological chart. I'd love to know what was going on because like 1997, 1998, I was meeting Lane Redmond. I met Paolo. I ultimately had the good fortune, well, not only the good fortune to meet Glenn, but the nerve to step up and talk to him because another friend of mine was taking lessons with him, and everybody and their brother at that time, I mean, drum circles were huge then, huge. And even frame drumming classes were very popular because Lane was doing it and Glenn was doing it. But every time I went to these, master classes with them, it was like, here's how you hold it, here are the basic strokes. And, after like 10 of those, I was ready to learn more. And so I dared to speak to Glenn, knowing that he was teaching in Manhattan and I'm not that far from Manhattan. So I dared to step up to him and asked him if a lowly little beginner like me could take a class with him. And he actually replied not with a yes, but with a, here's what I'd like to do. And I was like, well, what's that? And he said, well, I'd like to do an intensive of 4 weekends of immersing ourselves into the drum and have 6 weeks in between so that people learn what I have to offer, go home and practice it, and then we go to the next stage. And I was like, and I have very good administrative skills, and I had connections here in the Lehigh Valley of a good place that might take place. And so my first experience with Glenn was almost a year-long immersion of studying the drum in an intensive fashion from Friday night until Sunday night over the course of 4 weekends. So in the midst of all of that, I also got introduced to Rumi about that time. I think that's around the time that Coleman Barks' Essential Rumi came out. And leafing through that book of some of the words of Rumi, one of the ones that pretty much jumped right off at the page at me, which I think you're really going to love if you don't remember it, says, drum sound rises on the air. Its beat, my heart. A voice inside the drum says, I know you are tired, but come, this is the way.
Wow. That's incredible. Around this point, I can't imagine, because I'm feeling this too, but that people who are watching this video are going, have her play the drum, please, please,
Okay.
please. Well, and would you honor us with that? I don't want to put you on the spot.
Yeah,
But
sure. I'm happy to.
I mean,
So I'll play a little bit of that melody rhythm that I was talking about before. Doom, doom, taka, tak, doom, taka, tak, taka, doom, doom, taka.
beautiful resonant sound. Wow. Beautiful.
Yeah, and this is a Cooperman frame drum. They're made
Love
in
it.
Vermont. So this is Vermont birch that they hand bend and cure, and then they actually use a Remo head on it. And this one happens to be tunable, so you can see there. The little
You can
tuning.
tune it. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, so
Wow.
they make beautiful drums, and they're really, really nice people. So shout out
We're
to
going to
Cooper.
have to talk after the video. It's fabulous, really a beautiful rhythm too. It's just you could feel your body just starting to, entrain, sync up to that rhythm, and oh my gosh, it's so hypnotic. So from drums, obviously, another a percussive instrument, you were somehow introduced to the ceremonial systrum. Thank you for
So
bringing
thank
that
you
up.
for asking about the sistrum. Obviously, I'm very passionate about it and had no idea that it was going to be a part of my life's path. However, as I said earlier, I studied the frame drum with Glenn Velez. I had the good fortune to spend time studying the frame drum with Lane Redmond, and I also had the good fortune to travel with Lane Redmond, so I feel really blessed that I had a lot of meaningful and rich experiences before she passed on. And in fact, we just celebrated, those of us who are her devotees, we just celebrated her 3rd anniversary since being inducted into the Percussive Arts Society Hall of Fame. So if anybody's interested in looking into what that's about, I have a page dedicated to her on my website, tahya.com, and it's in the blog, and the very first blog post is about Lane. And in 2007, by the way, over time, people had said to me over and over again. They'd gift me things like this beautiful batik with the goddess Isis, and people would say, oh, you have to go to Egypt. And my automatic response was, I don't know. I don't know if I care about going to Egypt. I kind of feel like maybe I had a past life experience and I've been there and I've done that and I don't need to go. There are other places I want to visit. At that time, as I said, I was like diving into the poetry of Rumi. I was very curious about going to Turkey. So Egypt was not calling me that I was aware of. And then in 2007, a friend of mine who had traveled a dozen times to Egypt said, we're going to Egypt. Would you like to go? And I said, I don't know. And she said, well, part of our itinerary includes going out into the desert to drum with the Bedouins. I said, oh, now you're talking my language. That would be a very significant experience for me to really be in the culture and experiencing the drumming. And so I dropped everything, threw all caution to the wind, pulled out my credit card, and I went. And in the midst of going, suddenly every temple site that we visited, I was seeing these pillars that looked like the instrument that I had looked up when I had read about it in Lane Redmond's book, the sistrum. So they're known as sistrum pillars. They were an architectural design at almost every temple I went to. And then I also started to see the processions of women holding this instrument in their hand. Now, mostly they're depicted with the instrument this way. So I would say perpendicular to my body. And then, but again, I think that has to do with the carving on the walls that they were depicted.
They were sideways, right?
Yeah, so who knows how they really held them. But at any rate, that's what I saw over and over and over again on Hatshepsut's Chapelle Rouge, at the temple at Dendera, at the temple for Horus, at the temple for, everywhere you went. At Hatshepsut's temple, mortuary temple on the West Bank. I was seeing this instrument over and over again. And it has jingles, right? And so I came back from Egypt and I was like, I gotta have one of those. I play the Egyptian tambourine, I play the frame drum, I learned to play the doumbek, I play finger cymbals, and here's an instrument that was part of women's culture that they played in a ritual fashion. And I thought, well, I have to have one of these in my collection. And at that time, the only ones I could find were on museum shelves.
Yeah.
Ancient artifacts on museum shelves. And so literally I shrugged my shoulders and thought, well, damn, I am really bummed because I wanted to add one of those to my collection. And I didn't think anything of it. And then a few days later, after giving up, I kind of feel like I got a knock on the head from Hathor herself, saying, I'm commissioning you to bring it back into use. And the shy girl in me sort of responded with, what? Who? Me? Why would you pick me? I don't know anything about manufacturing or designing or... And basically, she wouldn't let it go and just kept nudging me. And then I realized, oh, well, Glenn Velez works with Cooperman frame drum, and they're bending wood, and the instruments that I saw, the sistrum that I saw, all had these, hoop type bent wood on the top. So I reached out to Glenn and asked him if he would mind, how did he feel about me pursuing this idea? And he gave me a big green light and said, here's who you need to talk to at Cooperman. And, thankfully, Cooperman thought it sounded like a very interesting idea, and they created the prototype for me. Ultimately, they decided that they didn't want to pursue the manufacture because they just didn't have the manpower, if you will, to produce the drums that they do, as well as, making the system Sistrum available in the marketplace. So then I had to go in search of another manufacturer, which I'm very glad I found. Of all things, Mid-East manufacturing. They're now called Soul Music, but again, thankfully, the goddess opened the door and the right words came out of my mouth and they found it of interest. And the design is related to an instrument that belonged to a chantress by the name of Hanut Awi. And on her instrument, that's, as I understand it, housed in the Louvre, there is this beautiful engraving of the goddess. And so I worked with an artist to reenact that drawing. And then the manufacturing people have it laser engraved into the handle. Mm-hmm. So, and then in terms, everybody always asks me why there are 16 jingles. And part of it is because I wanted to have something that had a robust sound. I was envisioning myself returning to Egypt one day, and the courtyards at the temples are massive. So I wanted something that would ring and sing throughout the courtyard. And so I came up with 16, and then the other reason I came up with 16 is that, of course, 1 plus 6 is 7, and 7 is a magical number. So that also inspired me. And the really fun thing, Ruth, is that a couple years after the Sistrum was in production and being manufactured, and they're on my website and I've made presentations about it, I reached out to a woman by the name of Alison Roberts, who wrote the book Hathor Rising, which kind of brings us full circle into you talking about the divine feminine rising. So her book is Hathor Rising, and I got a lot of information from her book, and so I wrote her a thank you note. I didn't think anything of it. I didn't think that I would ever hear back from her. I sent it to her via the publishing company. I didn't even know if she'd ever get it, much less respond. But I felt it was important for me to say thank you for all the information that she shared in this book and how helpful it had been in my journey. And she wrote back. And she complimented me on the design of this instrument and said that she really appreciated that there were 16 jingles because 16 had been a sacred number in Egypt because that was the ideal height at the inundation of the Nile. And so Hathor was also known as the mistress of 16.
Oh, how interesting. See, your soul knew that. It's like your subconscious knew
I
it.
I was not aware of it up here.
That's not coincidence. Nothing's
Isn't that
coincidence.
fun?
It's beautiful. Well, when I saw this, when on your website, I think it was, or I can't remember. No, maybe it was at your presentation. I can't remember. I was like, I have to have one. And it's very percussive. So I'm still learning how to use it. I think I would like to, because a lot of times I have people who are in a very meditative state. So if I play this, it's going to be like, wah,
Yes.
But I'm waiting. I'm just waiting to use it somewhere. And I feel like it's going to happen. It's going to find a space, a place for me to play this where it's just going to be exactly the perfect thing.
Well, I've heard from many people. Again, I deliberately designed it to be robust. So I won't play it that way over Zoom because I think it also will get distorted.
Right.
But I would outside play it so that all the jingles slide forward and then flip my wrist back. And all the jingles slide back and forth. And I play like that melody rhythm I just played before. I play that. And if anybody wants to learn, I'm happy to share and offer classes. And the other thing I've learned is that I can just wiggle my wrist back and forth really gently. And it creates a shimmering sound.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Can hear it over Zoom, sure. Yeah, it's a beautiful sound.
So I think
Yeah.
one of the ways that you could use it is using the shimmering, what I call the shimmering technique. And that way you could start a session or you could end a session or both, bookend it on either end, just with a very light wiggle of the wrist to create this shimmering sound. And the beauty of that also, in my opinion, as I understand it, is because the sistrum was the only instrument that made it into the innermost sanctuary of the temple. So if you think about the imagery that we see of processionals in ancient Egypt, we see the harp, we see clackers, we see the lyre, we see the drum, and we see the sistrum. But all of those other instruments were left behind as the priestesses went into the innermost sanctuary to accompany the chants to the deity. So it is also believed that it was used to clear the space, to allow the presence of the divine to usher in. And again, it's so fascinating to me because when I learned that, I thought, oh, this reminds me of my thoughts when I was a youngster and was jealous of the altar boys ringing the bell, because what was that intended to do? But to clear the space, to allow the transformation during that process of turning the host into the body of Christ, blah, blah, blah.
Fabulous.
So that idea dates back to the ancient temple ceremony in which the women played this instrument to clear the space.
Beautiful. Yeah.
And the other thing, just so you know, that you could do is you could also flick your wrist with the face of the goddess facing outward and just play it like this. So it's, you still get some volume of the rhythm in the jingles, but not as robust as when they're literally sliding from side to side.
Amazing. Yeah, I remember actually that you said that, using it to clear corners of my space. Yeah, yeah. Fabulous. Really, what a wonderful conversation.
I want to make sure that everybody listening knows that I also have several PowerPoint presentations, because as I went about researching this instrument, once I was inspired to bring it forth, to reemerge it in the 21st century, all of the instruments are very individualistic, but the one thing they have in common is that they are either the hoop type, like we were just looking at, or they are depicted as the naos type sistrum, which is a shrine top. And that's believed that that's the place where in the essence of the goddess resides. So I feel like that particular instrument maybe had one or two tiny little jingles, but it was more of a ritual implement as opposed to a percussion instrument. That's my feeling about it. But at any rate, I have amassed a huge collection of images of queens and musician priestesses and non-royal women playing this instrument throughout the course of the Egyptian history. So if anyone's interested, they can visit that, because I've made them available as videos on demand at my website.
Oh, fabulous. And all that information will be in the description below. And again, what an honor to talk to you, and fascinating
Ruth.
conversation. Thank you so much. Hope to have you back sometime.
That would be great. I would love it. And I hope we get to meet in person one day soon.
Please. Yes. Thank you.
Namaste.
Namaste.